Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Evil, Season 4, Episode 12. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I do love that we're bringing this whole Paul situation back around, especially as we're nearing the end of the series. Obviously, we touched on it a little bit a couple episodes back about kind of that grief demon that was in Father Ignatius. So it's kind of interesting to bring it back here and kind of get, not necessarily some resolution, but I guess some pseudo closure for Andrea in a lot of ways. Because I guess it's like, this is, once as I said previously, this was like I said like these last episodes 11 through 14 seem to be, at least based on what I just seen of episode 11 at the time, I was like, it feels like this is a sort of epilogue to the series, like a 4-part epilogue, and we're going to see like a lot of the closing of these stories and get some closure in a lot of ways. And it feels like this episode was kind of Andrea's closure in a lot of ways, especially where like it was kind of a closing the book for her, whereas like every other character in the story is kind of lost and trying to figure out, right, they're all out of a job. The assessors, the series is coming to an end, their jobs as assessors coming to an end, and how each one of them handles it, and especially in conjunction with what this episode's about, like as that ties into Andrea's circumstances, because the person they're dealing with is a guy named Paul. Turns out he's Paul Jr. He's the son of the man that Andrea was in love with, but she ended up choosing, God over him. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of direct parallels you could draw to the whole situation between Kristen and David. Obviously, like there's a little more complicated circumstances in their situation, but there are parallels you can draw. Really quickly, I want to talk about Paul's actor. I've seen that actor and stuff, and I've just never known his name. But it's not until I saw the credits and I saw like the name Nate, because the actor's name is Nathan, but the last name was Cordry, and I was like, wait, as in like Rob Cordry? I'm like, wait, and I thought about his face. I was like, wait, are they brothers? Are they related? Sure enough, looked it up. They are. I've never, like I said, I've seen Nathan and stuff before, but it never correlated until this episode, seeing the last name, and then thinking about his face and thinking about Rob's face. So I was like, oh yeah, they definitely look alike. It's like, it makes sense that they're brothers. I don't think I knew that. But either way, putting that aside, Paul is being haunted, or like he believes himself to have been possessed by a doppelganger, because like he found out about another like person out there who looks like him. And it's the main element to this episode is dealing with doppelgangers, and Kristen's looking at it like, okay, so this particular doppelganger ended up like sadly killing himself. He started kind of like, life seemed good, things were great, and then all of a sudden life started spiraling and he fell into depression and killed himself. And now Kristen's interpreting this from a psychiatric standpoint of, okay, this you're lumping onto this guy and kind of singing like it's you. Because at first I was sure Kristen was like, okay, this is you making these videos and you're just trying to pretend like it's a different person when in actuality it's you. But it's like, no, like I'm sure they didn't really cover it in the episode, but I'm sure they're like actual legitimate like a death certificate and everything. My initial thought was when he brought up that video, I was like, that's not me. I thought he was having a similar circumstance to Ben. I thought that was what was going on, but it turns out that's not the case at all. Whereas like Ben kind of went and like has like a different person kind of take over, and kind of, it's like, wait, when he snaps out of it, it's like, wait, it's almost like I was in a trance. There was some other person guiding my body. I thought that's what was going on. But Paul believes himself to be possessed, which Andrea's like, I know there's something here. She's like, every time at 2 a.m., like he gets haunted, and I saw the demon pretending to be the other him, while he also himself, Paul, sleepwalks. So Kristen and them and the squad are just going to watch, to see like if he's, like what this is all about. And it's a whole conversation about like, cool, what are we going to do next? And also, are you guys going to miss this type of thing? Which I love that Ben's kind of like apathetic about it. And they're like, really? And he's like, I've got two like feelings. He's like hunger and what was it? Disdain or something like that. But it's also like, he's like, yeah, I've had so many career changes. It's like, things come to an end. And it's like, oh, that line strikes a chord. Because for one, I'm like, I'm the person that never wants anything to end. So that those type of things of, right, everything comes to an end eventually. Yeah, but because they were even trying to pick a job. They're like, what are we going to do? Here's all these files. We've got 2 weeks left of the assessment program, which is funny considering like there's only 2 episodes left coming out week to week. So it's funny how that worked out like that too. I'm sure they did it on purpose. But because sometimes this show did overlap real life timeline wise with like when it aired. Like there were like one or two Halloween episodes that did purposely coincide with Halloween, but you know that's a whole thing of scheduling and stuff like that. But I'm sure stuff is meant to specifically air at a specific point in time. But like I said, there being 2 weeks left, fits very befitting considering, like I said, there's only 2 episodes left coming out week to week. Like I said, at the time of recording this, I'm getting to this late, so like the final episode has already came out yesterday at the time you're recording this, depending on when I'm able to get this up, if I'm able to get this up tomorrow or not. But either way, tensions on that side. That's kind of a moot point, but either way, they were trying to pick like, well, there's a lot of files here. Do we go through the most important ones? And then Andrea gave them this case. So it is a thing of like, well, kind of looking back on their job and career and stuff like that, while also dealing with this wild case where Paul does seem like he is possessed. He's sleepwalking. He's pretending to be Gregory. Well, not pretending to be Gregory, but seems to be Gregory, but Kristen doesn't quite believe. Which comes as no shock in the grand scheme of things, but still. Because he was walking down the hall, and then like the two versions of him split. One fell on the ground. I was wondering if the other saw the other version of him, but it's like, of course he did. Because Andrea is the only one that's kind of got the demon sight, so she sees the demon, like pretending that was possessing Paul, whereas everyone else just sees the collapsed Paul on the ground. So I did think it was an interesting solution of sorts. They ended up finding, like Ben ended up finding like, okay, a site that makes it so you can see your doppelgangers. And I love that Kristen was kind of like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he asked David. David's like, you literally said that your mom says if you meet your doppelganger, you die. So David's like, I'm not going to take that chance. And I love that even Ben initially was like, oh, well, let's see Paul's doppelganger. And it's another doppelganger named, what's his name, Jess, who's actually happy. And so Kristen's thinking like, okay, so you're using the doppelganger that died. You're using him as an outlet for your depression. Use this guy to be our outlet of like, right, this is what your life can be like. Don't let your depression control you. Your life can go down many routes. And even Andrea was kind of like okay with that. Like, it's like, if this can help him in the long run, she still believes an exorcism is needed. And Kristen's looking at it like, okay, exorcism, stuff like that could be a nice placebo effect. But she's like, I think he needs some proper care. So this does seem like it's a temporary solution. It's a band-aid until we find out apparently Paul threatened his family and told his wife like, oh, you need to take the kids, and squished them, run them over with a car until their intestines pop out and stuff like that. So never fully resolved that. So there's a good chance Paul, I don't know how he's going to resolve that with his wife after everything. Like, she was pretty much done with you going to put a restraining order against you. But I guess it's like, if you can get a psychologist to sign off on like, okay, he's doing better, then maybe that can remedy that. But that's going to be a hard hill to kind of climb for him, even when it's all said and done. Because at first I was like, well, they're with him all the time. I don't know if they were with him at that particular point in time. Oh, yeah. Because I was getting some events in my head mixed up, but it's like, no. Because we do know, sadly, later on, he tried to kill himself because he tried to down a whole bunch of sleeping pills, but they were luckily able to pump his stomach, so. But I would assume Andrea wasn't going to leave him. But who knows? Like I said, that was after they thought, like, after he saw the good doppelganger living a good life, he was probably like, okay, I'm good, and maybe Andrea didn't feel the need to stay with him, but that's why I thought the whole point was going to be like, well, it couldn't have been him. He was with us, but maybe at that point no one was watching him. Like, they think he's asleep, and he could have gotten on a computer or sent her a message like that. Who knows? So ultimately, it does come down to a exorcism, which there's a lot to tie into that, especially the Andrea stuff. Andrea was following the other like demon looking like Paul, and she followed it, and lo and behold, it led her to a room. And I was like, oh, is that going to be Paul Jr.? He's like, no, turns around, it's Paul Sr. being like, Andrea, I missed you. I came back for you. And she gets confronted by the demon disguising itself as her. It's like her having to confront her past, because this is the Andrea that abandoned Paul, or at least the guilt she has over it. Because she's like, because I chose the path I did, I wasn't there for Paul. Which, she ends up getting into a confession and talking to David, which I know for him it's got to be weird, considering he always goes to her for advice, and she's always been the most upstanding person. She's such a good person, so for her to have to confess, but it's because she feels responsible for Paul, and it's like, no, like, you can't be responsible for someone's decisions, because she's like, but he's in hell now, and she's like, I always thought myself a righteous person, but I abandoned him. And it's like, she's like, I believe in God, that God will forgive even someone that's in hell and or taking their own life. And she's like, I have my doubts and stuff. And David gave their Hail Marys and all that, so I think that's what she needed. Like I said, this is her finally confronting the past. And then during the exorcism, the demon pretends to be Paul Sr., being like, oh, I love you so much. Like, kiss me like you used to. Why did you abandon me? Why did you leave me? And she's like, no, you're not really Paul. And even, Paul Jr., like, shifted into like a kid. So this was years and years ago. This was the love that got away. So the way Paul Jr. was talking about it, like the way he turned into a kid again, that could be interpreted of like, okay, like his innocence was wiped away when his dad killed himself, just because it was like he was super young at the time, both literally in that regard of like, no, he was actually literally young, or maybe it's just because his dad killed himself, he reverted back to a younger version of himself. I'm sure it's probably more like, no, he actually was super young when his dad killed himself. But he's asking like, why did he do it? And she's like, I don't know. But it's like, we don't have to follow people we love into death, and kind of like find a way to kind of live and move forward. So it's something that not only Paul Jr. needed, they were able to exorcise the demon, but also I think it's something Paul was dealing with eternally, that he was able to kind of finally move forward, and Andrea is able to kind of finally move forward too, because this is kind of something that's always stuck with her. It's always there. And I'm sure like that demon, that grief little demon from a couple episodes back, bringing up Paul, I'm sure kind of brought a lot of that to the surface too. So like I said, when it's all said and done, Paul's still going to have like an uphill battle about, situation with his wife and children, but he's at least hopefully in a good place right now. So there's that. And tying this in with the whole larger conversation about the doppelgangers, and it also deals with everyone trying to figure out what their future is going to be. Let's start off with David. David tried to make a plea to the archdiocese about like, okay, like we could sell the airwave rights above the church to get some money, but the archdiocese is like, no, let's just sell the church outright for 45 mil. I'm like, it seems interesting that it's like, well, they're like, we have to shut down 5 parishes and yours was chosen. You're like, that seems interesting timing with all the stuff that's going down, the evil that's come to New York. The timing's just a little interesting. And it's like, well, what about David? He's going to get shipped off somewhere else. What about Sister Andrea? It's going to be shipped off somewhere else. And like, there's no changing, because David was like, no, I was told I would have a certain amount of time to try and rectify the money situation in the church. They're like, yeah, but we've decided to expedite it. So I'm like, I don't know if that's supposed to be some secret evil in the church that's going on there. I think it's interesting that this is all happening and we haven't gotten in contact with Dominic. The last time we saw him was episode 10. So he could always pop up in the next 2 episodes or something, but like the God, what was their name again? The entity. Like that, they haven't circled back yet. But, like I said, still 2 more episodes where they could rear their faces, in particular Father Dominic. So we'll see. But David's life is kind of there, and trying to figure out, what's next for him. He can't really control where he goes next. And I thought it was interesting the whole him and Andrea conversation, because he ends up having to tell her about, like, right, the church is getting, taken away from them and stuff. And for him, it's like he always thought, like, if he lived a life of righteousness and did right and did good, his life would make sense. But now it's like, it feels like his life is making less and less sense. In fact, he's more lost than he ever has been before, But Andrea kind of plays the piano with him. And I don't know if that's supposed to be like that holy, like David played it a couple episodes back. It's kind of like the what was it, the holy note or whatever, the one that kind of helped him focus when he was doing the remote viewing and stuff. I don't know if it's supposed to be that, but like the whole room glistens in light, and it's like, see, God is there, like that He hasn't abandoned you. He's right here in this room. You know, you might feel lost, but God is still there pushing you along. So it's just, David's got some stuff to figure out. Once again, is it going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, the whole Ellie situation? We'll see. What she said about, oh, David quitting in like 6 months, it's like, well, that time frame might be even shorter, but we'll see how things kind of play out on that front. Then we have the Kristen of it all. Kristen says like, oh yeah, that guy who's going to buy the mountain climbing business, he's going to buy it for $800K. Which, to be fair, if I do, correct me in the comments down below, isn't that the dude who's trying to buy the business from him? Like, that's the same dude that was a part of all of this to begin with, wasn't he? Like, he might not be directly connected to DF, but he's connected to all the evil stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure it's the same dude, because that was the whole bullshit to like lure Andy away so they could, like, you know, put him in that trance state and like kind of pump him with that liquid, you know. Like, I think it was the same dude, but I could be mistaken. But that kind of gets thrown in Kristen's face when it turns out Andy took 10 cents on the dollar for that deal and took the 80 grand and bounced. Now the question then becomes, did Andy do that? Because, man, they're doing everything they can to say fuck Andy in these last episodes, aren't they? It's like, no, we're going to tarnish Andy's reputation. Because it's like, once again, it's like, Andy was a decent enough dude. Once again, it's like, we're just predisposed to be like, oh man, it sucks that him and Kristen are together, because like you want David and Kristen to be together, but it's still the thing of, he seems like a good father. He seems like a dude trying to do the right thing. And it's like, yeah, these last 2 episodes just made him the biggest piece of shit ever. But once again, in his defense, this could have been an Ellie thing. Like, she could have been convincing. Like I said, she could be an evil person pretending just to be crazy, just to get close to Andy, just to kind of make this knife twist that much harder against Kristen, whatever the case may be. Not only did he take the money and run, because it's like, well, it's easier to take the 80 grand immediately than wait for the 800,000, because you'd also have to split that with your wife, but you're also like, okay, this 80 grand, I'm just going to take it and bounce. What about my children? It's like, well, Kristen made it clear how she felt about that. I thought, like, at the very least, when the kids are like, oh, it's like, does that mean he's going to ban? And I was like, no, your dad loves you, and he would never. And it's like, no, he up and left. And he took any money that was supposed to go towards you, making sure you're okay. He doesn't care. But once again, you know, he's not in his right mind. Neither is Ellie. Once again, that's debatable whether she's just straight up not in her right mind, or she's manipulating. She's not in her right mind, but pretending to not be in her right mind and manipulating him. I don't know. I just don't know. So Kristen's got to figure that stuff out. She's talking to Ben and David about it, and they're like, okay, are you okay? She's like, no, I'm fine. She's putting on a smile. It's like, yeah, when it rains, it pours. And I love all these suggestions about what they should do. It's like, oh, we should do a GoFundMe. I love, it was Lila that was like, oh, you should do an OnlyFans. And you're just like, Kristen's like, what? Who raised you? What kind of monster raised you? Because Lila's coming from the perspective of, oh, you don't have to do anything like naughty. All you have to do is like put your feet out there. It's like, you would make a killing, I'm sure. There are plenty of people who utilize OnlyFans in that capacity of like showing off their feet and, you know, being a little scantily clad. Doesn't have any things fully sexual in nature. Like you hear, granted, it's not everyone that does an OnlyFans. You know, there's the 1% who make an absolute killing, but I think there's other people who just make a nice and decent enough living. But it's like, I think we could all agree Kristen would do pretty damn well, but she would never do that, obviously. So, I mean, also, like, from a professional standpoint, that regardless of how you feel about it, it would be a situation of, it would be hard to, like, have any, like, practice. It would tarnish your reputation. It shouldn't, but, like, people will always look at you a certain way if you did it, even if you were just selling feet pics. So, I even love, they were like, oh, let's utilize me, like, Laura, say like I'm dying. It's like, you're not dying. You don't have a heart. She's like, well, I did. And I love, it's so effed up that later on they do start a GoFundMe. There's all these balloons and flowers wishing her well. I was like, that is all kinds of effed up. And it's like, Lynn, you're supposed to be the smart one. And Alexa's like, I thought I was supposed to be the smart one. She's like, dude, this is not the time to try and be funny, Lexus. And Lila's like, well, you told us that we can, I forgot what she said, you can lie. And it's like, no, she told us we can lie to corporations. And it's like, I love her dynamic with her kids so much. So it's like, no, we're going to be okay. We're going to make ends meet. You know, it's like, right, we're going to take what we all we have to do is use our talents, rely on ourselves. She doesn't want charity. It's about standing on our own feet, utilizing what we have to better ourselves and better our situation, which inspires her to contact Kurt to be like, okay, I want to open my practice. He's thinking about potentially calling it quits because, it's, I got to go to these different Comic-Cons to sell my book. And so she's like, I love that he's like, well, I don't know why he's so reluctant to hand over his patients. He's just kind of like, okay. I'm like, why do you care? Why are you holding on to that? Like, I don't know what the hesitation was. He didn't see, he seemed like, oh no, I'll support you. You're my friend and fellow colleague, but it still seemed hesitant. I'm like, why, Kurt? Why are you like, is that some doctor, thing for doctors where they don't want to refer their patients? Because it's like, well, if I do and I ever come revisiting my practice for whatever reason, I won't have that clientele anymore because I basically shipped it off to someone else and they'd be less likely to come back to me no matter what. So maybe that's what it is. It's future proofing of I don't want to fully commit to tossing over all my clients, because if I do, it means there's no future for me. I'm kind of all committed on this book thing with, maybe that's his justification, but just, I didn't understand the hesitancy he had. So I thought that was fascinating. I also love with Kristen. She did this a couple episodes back with the chatbot situation. I think that was episode 9. And she started off with Andy, but then she ended up switching it over to David. She was initially going to look up her own doppelganger, but she didn't, and instead looked up David's, which is poetic. But it ended up being this fighter dude, and she ended up having a sex dream about him. I was like, oh, that's hot and steamy. And just her laying in bed being it's kind of the perfect time to have that sex dream, because it's it fits with the conversation her and David had episode 10 about the whole, oh, if we had another life, and he's like, oh, I'd have one life for God and one for you, and it feels kind of befitting in this regard. So there's that. Plus, she actually does eventually look up her doppelganger, who is a singer, someone singing and playing the guitar, singing in Dutch, which are okay, I love how, I was of course that would be the case. I'm that's super poetic, and that's 100% on purpose, but I was oh, that's such a nice, cute touch to do that. So yeah. That's her go-to plan, is to kind of get that ball rolling in that capacity of yeah, this is where my the path I'm going with my job. So other than that, we also have the situation with Ben. Ben has kind of got some job offers, he's going to be a part of some program that's going to pay him $650,000 a year. Then he gets another job offer. Someone's like, oh, we'll actually pay you $950,000 a year. You're like, Jesus. And he's kind of right, why can't I just be happy? Why can't I just accept success and be happy with it? Because I guess he's kind of nihilistic and almost expecting the worst. And so he looks up a doppelganger, a guy named Bashir, who had married, kid, and everything, and he's watching that, and it's just kind of huh. I love that he even asked Jen, it's oh, you don't got nothing to say about that, Mr. Jen? And he grabs his hat, but I think there was a part of him that was scared to take the aluminum foil, the tin foil, and the hat off. Because, well, the hat doesn't do anything. The hat's just meant to cover up the tin foil, so no one has to ask any questions. But I think he was kind of afraid, because he was reaching for it, but he's like, do I really want to take the chance of slipping back, and maybe this remedy might not work anymore once I've kind of backtracked. So I think there's a part of Ben maybe missing, who's going to miss this whole thing a lot more than he's kind of willing to admit. But I think there's also him just scared about the direction things can go, just the typhoon that his life has been. Granted, that typhoon has been in the context of this assessments and all the crazy shit that's happened in his life. But I think it's just him just being weary and just being right, why can't I just be happy with potential success? I don't know if it's just him scared of taking that step forward past all of this stuff, and just what's my life going to be like that? Can I guarantee, I think maybe he's scared of there are no guarantees in life, and maybe that's what's kind of tugging on him a little bit, why he can't just be happy with his own success. But like I said, maybe it could also just be a own borderline nihilistic pessimist view of things, where he just kind of assumes the worst is going to happen, and he just can't let himself get too happy, because he doesn't want the rug to kind of get yanked from underneath him type of situation. So We also have the situation with Leland's trial, and Kurt gets brought on stand to kind of testify for like Leland's mental state. But I think the lawyer did it on purpose. I think he like made himself clear to Kurt. I mean, Kurt saw a demon like 2 episodes ago, and the Storm episode, everything with Cheryl. So you're like, okay, that's okay. So I was like, his eyes were already kind of open. He'd already seen demons beforehand, and that was another situation. But I don't think that was his eyes being like fully open. I think Leland gave the lawyer the go ahead to be like, yo, do it. And he revealed himself to to Kurt to scare him. And Kurt was going to falter until he saw Kristen leave, and it's like, well, he knows what Kristen's going through. Like, he did. Obviously, at that time, Kristen didn't know about the money, the business being sold, and Andy taking off with that money. Also, he didn't know about her assessment job, losing her assessment job, but he does know, like, her mom died, Andy cheated on her. Like, he knew all of that, and he also knows like what Leland has put her through, and he didn't want to disappoint her. So he's like, right, I do believe Leland should be locked up in a mental facility, psychiatric facility for the rest of his life. So we have that. And boy, oh boy, the next person that was on stand afterwards, I mean, later in the episode, but it's like Kristen. Oh my God, that had to feel so good. Where Kristen was like, Leland is this, and this. He did this. Oh, like our first interaction, our first like pop off. Like, it's all coming full circle of like, oh yeah, like he told a patient to fake demon possessions. Like, you can't prove that. Here's the receipts. I told him to stay away from my daughter. Oh, here's a photo of him with my daughter, Lexus. Then there's the whole Bumblebee Valley thing where he's kind of labeled as a pedophile. I was like, I love Kristen coming with all the receipts and restraining orders. It's so good, making him look so bad. And she's like, my mom. And she starts breaking down, and you're like, oh, she's putting up, I mean, you're really hurting about your mom's death, but you might as well utilize it to like take the knife, stick it in as deep as possible when it comes to Leland and twisting it. You know, she's like, all this, my mom was a good person, and all the besmirching of her name, and it's like, oh, Kristen's playing it up on the stand. I was like, I love it. And then finally we had the Leslie of it all, her being called in as a witness. And the judge being like, oh, I wanted to see you in my chambers. I was like, that's kind of weird. But then he was like, okay, are you being intimidated? He's like, I can tell when people are being like, so are you still willing to testify? And she's like, yes. I was kind of getting an inkling, like, is he going to, I legitimately, when he was walking past her, I was like, is he going to snap her neck or something? I was like, but I was like, oh no. And he grabbed a sword and sliced her head off. I was like, okay. I had an inkling. I was like, is he going to snap her neck? Okay, he didn't. Okay, I guess I'm being crazy. Nope. Before I even had real time to process all that, he'd already sliced off her head and wrapped her body up and dumped it out the window into the garbage dumpster beneath his window. And it's like, yeah, so where's your witness? And it's like, no one's going to question the judge. Well, the judge will be like, oh yeah, she left and went to, like, you know, you'd never know that he was lying. And I was like, because I had to sit there, I was like, okay, so has the judge been on Leland's side? Because at first I was like, is he a demon? But it seems like no. It just seems like they were able to potentially pay him off, because as the lawyer says, he's like, well, everyone has a price for their soul. So they probably just paid him off. Like, him being, like, okay with, like, just, like, the casualness when she just killed Leslie and tossed her out the window. I was like, oh, you kind of feel bad for Leslie, but it's like, to be fair, she dug her own grave. She had multiple times opportunities to potentially get out, but she stuck around Leland. So it's like, right, you reap what you sow, sadly. So I was like, wasn't expecting her story to turn out that way. I don't even know if I really thought Leslie would pop up again. But yeah, oh, she's here to testify. Oh, you don't even have to worry about her, like, because she was freezing on a stand a little bit, but they didn't want to take the chance that she might actually still testify. So they wanted to test her to see if she actually was still testifying. And because she said she would, you gotta go. So I was like, okay. So it makes you wonder, when did they get to the judge? Up until now, I think he probably was being fair with the trial, but maybe after Kristen was on the stand, they decided to go towards him. So he tried to be as impartial as possible. They can't really do anything to Kristen. They also knew her around. She is the mother of the Antichrist and stuff. So I'm sure there's an angle to that, but I'd like to believe it was after Kristen was on the stand they got to that judge. So, because this was the first time he did anything that was kind of like beneficial towards Leland. So it feels like, because he accepted everything Kristen handed him. I mean, I'm sure he could have found some BS reasons not to, but he was so okay with everything, and now it's just like, oh. It's so interesting when just like, because Richard Kind typically doesn't play like evil characters, so for him to, at least the things I've seen Richard Kind in, he's never played like an evil character. It was like the mayor of Gotham was like a part or some stuff. I mean, it's been a hot minute since I've seen Gotham, so I could be misremembering. I don't think he did anything particularly evil, but it is like, well, he, it kind of fits in line with this, in fact, of like, oh yeah, the corruption and stuff. Did I talk about that last episode? When I brought up Richard Kind, I was like, I thought I might have mentioned it. I think maybe I mentioned it. If I didn't, I'll reiterate it here. I want to say Spin City might have been the first thing I ever saw Richard Kind in. I think it is. I can't remember. That's the earliest memory. Because I saw Spin City for the first time, like, obviously a while back. It was like well after the show was off the air, but like that still might have been the first thing I ever saw him in, to my recollection. I'm sure if I go back and there's like older movies or TV shows, I was like, oh, he was in this and I just didn't remember. But that's the first thing that comes to mind. Like I said, I don't remember if I brought that up last episode or not. Because I think in my head, like, his character from Spin City is how I always will view. It's one of those things, like, you view certain characters a certain way. Like, even Mike Coulter, it's like, well, I always, like, in my head, even though it wasn't the first thing I saw him in, I will still always associate him with Luke Cage, which, good and bad for him, and he's kind of expressed his feelings about that. But either way, you get the point I'm making. So it's like, I think that's why sometimes I have a hard time. That I was like, oh yeah, because I associate him with his character from Spin City. So either way, because of all of this, Leland's everything against Leland has been dropped now. So he's free to do all that he wants to do. And it's like, well, the evil's already here in New York, which Andrea did confront him. It's like, oh, I see you for who you are. So what that all means, well, Leland being like, he's like, oh, you and your daughters won't see me, which I see that as you guys won't see me coming when I strike type of thing. Which, I mean, he has his investment in that family. Once again, he still kind of got what he wanted because Timothy's with her mom, but I also don't know if that's still part of the plan or not. There's still also the Lexes of it all, like what role, if anything, is that? Because we haven't really seen that. The most we've seen of that this season was like her immediate connection with Timothy. Like, all the sisters have a fine enough relationship with him, but it's like, because of Lexus's circumstances, it really connected with Timothy, because that was also pre him being baptized and everything. So there's still things that can be pulled, like, thread wise with the Lexus of it all before we end. But I mean, next episode is the penultimate episode, so it's going to be interesting to see what goes down and what that will potentially set up for the final episode, the series finale. It's going to be really interesting to see what this next assessment will be. Will it be kind of a full-blown part 1, part 2, like a 1-2 punch? I'd assume not, because these are, like I said, the episode. I don't remember what episode 13's title is, but it is still like fear of something, and the same thing of 14. So it's not going to be like a 1-2 punch. The threads will continue, like the overarching storyline stuff will thread through, and as the assessment portion of their lives come to a close, with the series coming to a close, it's going to be interesting to see how it all comes together and just how exactly this plays out. Will Leland survive the end of this series? No, but like this battle of evil, which is going to be eternal, like how will it actually end is the question. How will Leland meet his end? Will the demon's world turn against him and find a new liaison? It's like, well, kind of like, will it end with, this all has to start all over again? Leland played his role, but he failed, so we got to start all over. Or will, like, Leland's death kind of be the nail in the coffin for this whole operation? I don't fully know what to expect. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.